On the evening of Saturday, May 23, 2026, Donald Trump opened his social media account and posted 4 words that the entire world had been waiting 85 days to read. The deal with Iran, he wrote, has been largely negotiated. He said final aspects and details were being discussed. He said the announcement would come shortly. He said the Strait of Hormuz would be opened. He said nothing about enriched uranium. He said nothing about Iran's rebuilt missile program. And within 30 minutes of the post going live, Iranian state media published a statement saying Trump's announcement was incomplete and inconsistent with reality, and that the Strait of Hormuz would remain under Iranian management regardless of what the American president had just told the world. The same deal, announced by the same man, contradicted by the same adversary inside the same hour. The pattern that has defined every critical moment of this war, the announcement, the reversal, the ambiguity that fills the space between, played out one more time on the evening of May 23rd. And the world that has been watching this conflict for 85 days was left once again in exactly the position it started. To understand what is actually in this deal and why the gap between Trump's announcement and Iran's response tells you everything you need to know about whether it will hold, you need to understand what the last 3 months of negotiation have actually produced, because the answer is both more and less than either side is saying publicly. The war began on February 28th when the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes that killed Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei in the first hours of the conflict. Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz, deploying mines across the shipping channels, and installing Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, as his successor. In the weeks that followed, the United States Navy established a blockade of Iranian ports. Oil prices crossed $110 per barrel, and what Gulf states called the worst global energy crisis in decades began working its way through supply chains into the inflation numbers that every American family was paying at the gas pump, the grocery store, and the heating oil tank. The diplomatic track has been running since those first days, primarily through Pakistan. General Asim Munir flew into Tehran in April carrying a structured American proposal. He met 3 different power centers inside the Iranian government and received 3 different answers. The Foreign Ministry said yes. The Parliament said no. The Revolutionary Guard said the question itself was not acceptable. The ceasefire that Pakistan produced on April 8th was real enough to stop the bombing for 2 weeks, fragile enough to fray almost immediately, and limited enough that it resolved exactly none of the underlying issues that started the war. In the weeks since, the negotiating structure has expanded. Qatar has entered the mediation alongside Pakistan. Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, has maintained regular back-channel contact with Iranian counterparts. A 4th round of nuclear talks ended in Oman on May 11th, with no agreement and further negotiations planned. On Thursday and Friday of this week, Pakistani and Qatari negotiators held intensive sessions with Iranian counterparts in direct preparation for the announcement Trump made on Saturday evening. What the deal actually contains, according to the regional officials and diplomats who have described it on condition of anonymity, is a memorandum of understanding structured in 2 distinct phases. The first phase would declare a formal end to the war and begin the gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping. It would include American steps to ease restrictions on Iranian ports alongside limited sanctions relief and the potential unfreezing of some Iranian overseas assets. This phase is the part that Trump announced. This phase is the part that both sides have tentatively agreed to in outline. The second phase is where the deal either becomes a genuine framework for stability or collapses into the same cycle of partial agreements and reversals that has characterized the entire conflict. The second phase requires Iran to enter negotiations on its nuclear program over a period of between 30 and 60 days. The United States position, stated repeatedly by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is that Iran must never obtain a nuclear weapon and must turn over its stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. Iran's position, stated through its foreign ministry spokesperson, is that the Strait of Hormuz and the formal end of the war must be settled first, and only then will nuclear discussions be appropriate. Iran has not confirmed any agreement to transfer or dilute its enriched uranium. It has said only that the strait is among the topics discussed. That gap between the American demand and the Iranian position on uranium is not a small disagreement about timing. It is a disagreement about whether Iran will ever give up the leverage it spent 30 years and billions of dollars acquiring. 60% enriched uranium is not a negotiating chip that Iran produced by accident. It is the single most strategically valuable asset the Islamic Republic possesses in any conversation with the United States. For Iran, surrendering that stockpile before a formal end-of-war framework is in place and verified would be to give up the only thing that makes Washington take Tehran seriously. For Washington, allowing Iran to retain that stockpile after claiming a peace deal would be to hand the Revolutionary Guard a permanent shield against any future American pressure. The gap is structural. Neither side has moved, and here is the problem that explains why Trump's announcement landed in the market at the same moment that Iranian state media was calling it inconsistent with reality. Trump spoke to 8 regional leaders on Saturday before posting his announcement. He spoke to the heads of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Bahrain, and Pakistan. He spoke to Benjamin Netanyahu separately and said that conversation went very well. He did not say whether any Iranian official confirmed the deal framework before he announced it. He did not say when the announcement would become formal. He said shortly, which is a word that has appeared in American diplomatic communications about this war since March and which has yet to produce a signed agreement. Iran's Fars news agency said the Strait of Hormuz would remain under Iranian management, according to the latest text exchanged between the two governments. That is a fundamentally different outcome from the one Trump described. In Trump's version, the strait opens. In Iran's version, the strait opens, but Iran continues to manage it. The distinction is not semantic. Management means inspection authority. Management means the ability to define what open means on a day-to-day basis. Management means that Iran retains functional control of the choke point while allowing the commercial traffic that its economy needs to resume. That is not the same thing as the Strait of Hormuz returning to its pre-war status as a free international waterway under international maritime law. There is another problem embedded in Trump's announcement that nobody in the celebration coverage is addressing clearly. Iran's military position has changed since February 28th. And not entirely in the direction that Washington's early claims suggested. Trump declared in March that the Iranian military had been destroyed and the war was essentially over. It was not. Iran still has its enriched uranium. It has a missile program that Iranian officials describe as being actively rebuilt. It continues to express support for armed proxies throughout the region. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has not been seen publicly since the war began, but he remains in position, and the Revolutionary Guard that serves as the actual sovereign authority of the country is more entrenched, not less, than it was before the bombing started. Iran has not surrendered. It has negotiated from a position of sustained damage that has not become collapse. Trump talked to Netanyahu. That conversation, described as going very well, is its own complication. Netanyahu pressed the United States to go to war with Iran in the first place. Israel's goals in this conflict have never been identical to Washington's. Israel's goal was the permanent degradation of Iranian military capability and the dismantling of every proxy network Iran has built in the region over the past 40 years. The American goal, which has shifted considerably since the war began, is now best described as a Hormuz reopening, plus a nuclear framework that leaves Iran non-nuclear, followed by an exit from a conflict that has pushed American inflation to its highest level in years. Those two sets of goals overlap in some areas and diverge significantly in others. Netanyahu's statement that the conversation went well is not the same as Netanyahu agreeing to the deal terms. Israel has the ability to restart hostilities in Lebanon in ways that would immediately destabilize any Hormuz agreement Iran has just signed. What happens next is being decided as of this moment by the same forces that have shaped every turning point in this conflict. The Revolutionary Guard, which blocked the April 17th deal within 6 hours of its announcement, has not changed its institutional incentives. An Iran that signs a deal with Washington is an Iran where the Revolutionary Guard's grip on the economy, the smuggling networks, and the foreign currency flows begins to weaken. The Revolutionary Guard has consistently demonstrated that it will sacrifice Iranian national economic interest to preserve its own institutional power. That calculation has not changed because Trump posted on social media that the deal is largely negotiated. Asim Munir was in Tehran on Saturday, photographed meeting with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. That meeting, the latest in a series of Munir missions to Tehran that have collectively produced more progress than any other diplomatic channel in this conflict, is the reason that there is a deal to announce at all. Pakistan has threaded a needle that no other country on earth could have threaded. It has maintained the trust of Tehran, Washington, Riyadh, and Beijing simultaneously while navigating a succession crisis inside Iran, a Revolutionary Guard that obstructs every agreement, and an American president whose diplomatic announcements sometimes precede the agreement they describe. The question that every oil trader, every tanker captain, every government watching from a distance, and every American family paying $4.50 at the pump is now asking is not whether the deal is largely negotiated. Trump said it is largely negotiated. The question is what the unannounced remainder contains, whether the Revolutionary Guard will allow it to survive contact with reality, whether Israel will hold, and whether a memorandum of understanding that does not address 60% enriched uranium can be called a peace deal in any meaningful sense. The deal may hold, the strait may open, the oil may flow. The crisis that began on February 28th may conclude with a framework that both sides can describe as a victory for their domestic audiences while leaving every fundamental disagreement between Washington and Tehran intact, but temporarily suspended. That outcome, unsatisfying as it would be to analysts, historians, and the architects of the original American war aims, would nevertheless be an outcome. It would be the Strait of Hormuz open for business. It would be tankers moving. It would be inflation beginning to recede. It would be the worst global energy crisis in decades beginning, however imperfectly, to resolve. Or the Revolutionary Guard will read the announcement tonight and issue a statement before morning that walks it back, the way they have walked back every other announcement in this conflict, and the world will wake up on Sunday having watched the same 12 hours it has already watched twice before: the announcement, the reversal, the ambiguity, and the strait still closed.